One famous French fencer said, fencing is like chess at the speed of light. Learning how to say no, especially as an earlier stage CEO, is as important as knowing what you're saying yes to. You need to be comfortable in discomfort. You need to be organized in a disorganized environment. You need to be a believer when there's no reason to believe.
Do you worry about platform risk?
No. Historically, platforms have really struggled to build this themselves. 99.9% of the time, I'm dealing with problems or issues or questions that no one else was able to solve, whether it's the team, whether it's customers, whether it's disagreements between two people in the company.
Welcome to Fintech Leaders. My name is Miguel Armaza, and today my amazing guest is Nico, CEO of Clair. So Nico, I want to start with one thing. What did you learn in fencing? I hear you were in the Harvard fencing team. And unlike tennis, football, basketball, I think it's a sport that is widely, I wouldn't say misunderstood, but it's just not explored by 99% of people, or maybe more.
Completely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this. Okay, so fencing. I have to bring you back to when I was 7 years old. Okay, so we're going a little ways back.
Great.
I grew up in Europe. Typically go to school, and on Wednesday afternoons, most public schools and private as well, will have it off for kids to do outside activities. And then you have these kind of state-sponsored athletic centers, and they have a bunch of sports. And at the beginning
like a YMCA, but it's state-sponsored.
State-sponsored, exactly. And mine in French is le Centre Sportif du Bout du Monde, which is one of those centers. That's the name of it. And I grew up next to it. So as every kid in my school, I'm the second. So my brother started with that process. Would go to the athletic center, and then you would see all of the different sports, and you could just try them out for, I would say, the first month or two, and then you'd had to sell it onto one. And when I was 7 years old, it was also the time when Star Wars was a big deal.
This is when the trilogy returned.
Exactly.
I remember.
Exactly. And I remember that I absolutely loved it. And I would, find any wooden stick, again, go back to a 7-year-old, right? And just try to fight off my 2-year-older brother. And then one day what happened was my brother came back and said, hey, I'm gonna go do fencing. This thing is so cool. And he was so excited about it. And I asked my mom, I was like, hey, can I go with? I wanna see what this is. And I couldn't, as a 7-year-old, you don't really understand it perfectly. But when I got into the room, it was Star Wars, right? And so I just absolutely loved it. And I was too young to start, so I had to wait about a year and a half or two. And I got so, obsessed over it that they started putting me into competitions at the, regional level. And I never stopped. And then I started getting sponsored by the state to go fence internationally. And then I kept growing in the sport, ended up being the captain of the Swiss national team.
Swiss national team.
And I just fell in love with the sport. It taught me so much. And I could spend the entire, podcast, probably we need to change subject, but talking about why I think this is an incredible sport.
So what is important to win in fencing?
The best way to summarize it is one famous French fencer said, fencing is like chess at the speed of light. You're in front of someone and you have to to keep it simple, poke them before they poke you, but it goes really fast. So you have to do a lot of muscle memory in terms of what you want to take on, and then you have to play a little bit three-dimensional chess where you're trying to figure out what the other person's going to do, anticipate that, then react to it or preempt it. And then once you do it, depending on how it lands, you then need to really quickly react. So you need to train a lot, you need to be physically very explosive. And in addition to this, you need to kind of be smart about what you're doing because it's, now I'm a runner, and that's a little bit easier mentally because you don't have this level of speed and complexity.
A lot of companies love to hire former athletes because of the competitive drive, right? They also like to hire them because they know how to play in a team. Fencing is not a team sport. It's just you, right?
For a long time it was. I was going to stay in Switzerland and fence for the national team and join the military service in Switzerland is mandatory. I ended up going another route, which is come to the US. And one of the things that was appealing was that in the US on the collegiate level, it's a team sport. So very little wins or losses are actually your individual wins or losses. You're just gaining points for the team. And so concretely what ended up happening was I was as interested into my results as getting helped or helping people on the team. one of the guys that ended up being a 3-time Olympian, he was 18, I was like a junior in college. He was not at the maximum of his physical capacity, so I would like wake him up, we would go run like this thing called stadiums, which you run up and down stadiums. That really taught me that if you want to go fast, of course, but go on your own, but if you want to go far and you want to do something for like 4 years and as a whole team win a big tournament, like you have to go as a team, you have to learn how to coach people, you have to learn how to be coached.
So you took that competitive nature and initially you applied it at your job at JP Morgan.
Yeah.
I was at a big bank as well. I was at Citi and Bank of Tokyo. The impact that you can have there, even if you're the most competitive person, is very limited. It's probably why you didn't last too long in banking.
I really believe that being an entrepreneur is an adjective, it's not a title. There's brilliant people at JP Morgan. I think it's a brilliant organization. I just felt that there was a need in the financial technology space that was unmet, and I felt that JP Morgan was not going to solve it. Most banks are, compensated for something called return on equity, which is invest in things that for every dollar you put in, you get the maximum, return on equity, which is, to simplify, like money. And, serving the underserved is not at the top of that list. It takes a lot of innovation, a lot of effort, a lot of years, a lot of investment in order to serve them well in a differentiated way. And that's not a low-hanging fruit for a large bank. What I was interested in was better fit for an entrepreneurial journey than building it within JP Morgan.
I've read about your aha moment, and it was very directly tied to the Uber payments experience. Yes. Talk a little about that, but let's also start talking about Clair, because that's probably the most interesting part that you've been doing.
Yeah, no. When I came to the US, again, my parents are not Americans. I'm not an American, so I didn't have a social security number. I didn't have a passport. I didn't have a green card. I didn't have like a US bank account. I have a phone number. Just the whole basic things that you typically have in the US. I didn't, and I wanted to do things outside of the typical budget of school, like go out for food with my friends, do things on the weekends, like buy extra things, and so I was I needed to get a side job. And when I tried to get a side job, it was a horrible experience in terms of onboarding, but principally getting paid. I was, let's say, working 10 hours during a week, but then I would have to wait 2 weeks for the payroll to kind of close, and then after that, like a few days later, I would get my check in the mail. And I felt like, why can't I just the hours I've worked this week contribute to what I want to do this weekend? And I always felt like the data sitting in the cloud, like I have worked my hours, I'm just waiting for somebody to process payroll, and every time I ask, people are like, well, that's the way it's done always, and so nobody's questioning it. And Uber is something that I saw while at JP Morgan that I was like, aha, these guys have figured out something that most people haven't figured out yet. This was like circa 2016, 2017, where Uber was trying to grow really fast because they had a lot of demand, but they had to figure out the supply part, which is how can you get drivers to get on the road and drive for Uber? And so what they created is Uber Money, which is the ability for every driver to get paid at the end of every ride. And that helped to attract a lot of drivers. And I understand why. It's the same problem I had in college, which was like, hey, I want to work Monday, Tuesday, and then on a Wednesday, spend that money. And so they created a very simple way to do it. And that's why I was like, wow, now I'm interested in taking the Uber Money concept and really democratize it, whether you're at a small business, a large business, a medium business, any business in America should have a solution like this.
You're not an engineer. Was that a handicap at the beginning? How do you compensate for that?
It's a great question. At the beginning, it was definitely a challenge because we had to find incredible talent that could do it. And if you've ever met engineers, they typically will specialize into one area, or they will be able to do a lot of things, but they can't really flex into the product role. So what we excessively focused on is what kind of engineering advisory could we get in order to get the right engineering talent? So that slowed us down at the beginning. But now I feel like it is a strength because we have been able to build an organization where the engineering team is able to feel empowered to build a lot of things. And then they have a lot of respect for all the stuff that I do on my side to make sure that they have everything they need in order to write the code.
So tell us how Clair looks today, and how does that compare to where you got started?
Yeah, it's a very different world. When we started at Clair, the hypothesis was that every worker in America would actually be fairly interested in completely switching their day-to-day banking life, meaning where they send their direct deposit, in order to get access to their pay every day. That hypothesis turned out to be wrong. It was not fully wrong, it was partially wrong. But when you're partially wrong, you're wrong when it comes to product market fit. What ended up being true is that a small portion of people were willing to update their direct deposit and sign up for a new bank account in order to get access to their pay immediately. But the vast majority of Americans are actually happy with their existing financial life, and they're looking for employer-connected additional financial services, such as the ability to get your money in real time. This little distinction took us about 2 years to figure out. Fintech development, especially in the early days, it's like the speed at which you learn things, especially in a partnership-led distribution, takes a little bit of time. And it took us a year to, kind of keep pivoting the product until fitting where we are today, which is focusing on high-tech payroll and workforce management systems. So catering to them as our customers and allowing them to build an embedded wage advance solution that connects to any card or a card that they have. And that has, been an immense success for us.
Let's talk a little bit about underwriting. Do you think the way most people are underwritten today in the US works for everyone? Tell us about the state of credit building and underwriting.
I get really excited about this question, so I appreciate you asking it. I think that the credit underwriting system works for a small minority of people. I think it's the best of all the worst worlds if you don't have access to great data. And it's kind of a simple system. It's like, what sort of lending products, if any, have you ever had, and what was your ability to repay them? If you think about it, that's pretty simplistic. I think what's much more interesting is, hey, I now know that you have worked hours. I now know that, you will get paid in 2 weeks. I know that, your hours have been clocked in. I know that your business has never missed running payroll. Well, that is a much better way to underwrite someone. And by underwriting, I mean you're gonna have a less risky pool of people, and therefore you can make credit a lot more affordable to the population. That same person that applied for a credit card most probably also has a job. So what I mean by this is that financial services commonly used is not accessing a data set that is immensely valuable in making credit faster, cheaper, and honestly a much better user experience than what exists today.
On that note, so I agree with you, but at the same time, I think it's ironic that if you look at FICO, the company, I just pulled it up before coming here, the stock over the last 10 years is up 1,200%, 12x.
Yeah, of course, and I think they will continue to grow, and I think FICO has already done a step improvement from when there was nothing, right? Because the baseline is not credit scores. The baseline is there is no ability for banks to assess credit worthiness. So FICO is a step forward from that. FICO will have to adapt to net new forms of data sets out there, such as everything linked to employment data. Because if not, then their stock price, will decrease. And if you listen, to what FICO is talking about, they acknowledge that as well. It's just that the baseline is so low. So of course they're going to grow 12x. My point is in 5 years, they're going to have to adapt their data sets in order to continue growing at that speed.
Yeah, cash flow underwriting is part of the conversation now.
Exactly.
So you talk about, essentially pivoting the company. How does that look like inside the company? Maybe tell us how you manage the team, some of your philosophies around leading the company.
I think that there's two Nico as CEO kind of behaviors. There's peacetime and wartime. In peacetime is the company's growing super fast, customers are flocking to us, the product and the strategy fit exactly what you need. And we spend a lot of time at Clair, in that phase. But then there's also wartime, which is you're not confident in the product strategy. You're maybe not even confident in the people leading the product strategy. You don't think that your customers are necessarily happy with what you've built. And I think the first thing when that happens is honesty and transparency. Every single time that, we've been transparent and honest, which we hope we've always done, the result was people understand it, people actually agreed with what we were saying, and then helped us, including our investors. And so going back to your question around pivoting the company, that was definitely a wartime situation where we ended up acknowledging facts. We realized that like this was not going to be a generational company we were building because consumers didn't exactly want what we had built. And I said, nothing else matters than that. So let's actually make a plan to bring it into a direction that we know is going to make it a generational company. And that's when we pressed play and said, okay, we're going to go build Clair the way we wanted. It was hard. We lost great people. We also initiated conversation with some of our customers that, didn't want us to change, where, there's a few conversations I can think of where we had to let go of some of our revenue generating customers, but it was for the purpose of focus and being able to do the pivot the right way.
Now let's switch topics a little bit and talk about AI.
Yes.
What are the main areas of impact of AI that you see?
The way I like to explain it is there's kind of 3 horizons for us at Clair on AI. The first one is the simplest one is make sure that everybody's tinkering with it. And by tinkering, I mean just try it all. Good examples is customer support, engineering speed, strategic decision-making at the company, data, user experience, chat, whatever you can think of, you need to tinker with it. The second one is what I would call the operational layer. So once we feel confident that there's a much more efficient way to do things with AI, then the operational layer comes in. I mean, some of the leading ones for us are customer support. So we've really implemented heavily and invested heavily into giving, our customers the ability to get responses faster and better than a human can even give you. Because a human has to look at a computer, digest data, and then feed it back to you. But a computer is already connected to that data set, so they can give you stuff faster. Other ones is just speed of development on the engineering side, and a lot of fixes you can have there. And then a lot of things at the day-to-day operational level, including for me, like, I've never had an assistant, and a lot of my scheduling is done via different AI tools, and I'm a big believer in that. And then the third layer for us is everything linked to fundamental user experience changes. That layer is, I think, the earliest in fintech. And the reason why is because if you take the average consumer who's using our tools, they're still going to pick up their phone. They're still going to click a few buttons. It takes on average somebody 70 seconds to go from I'm interested in this to take an advance. It's very hard for AI to make this even better. So I think we're going to see some changes once hardware changes, but we're still I think there's still a little bit to go there. And then finally, just to go back to the operational layer, I think underwriting is one, especially in fintech, that can be so much better done. That one ultimately has a user experience impact because it's going to be cheaper, faster, and more money is going to be available to consumers.
On the 70-second experience you mentioned, a few of my guests, and I've heard from other people outside of podcasts as well, say they've done tests to see if they deliver, let's say, the underwriting experience too quickly. And this is something that the former CTO of Plaid, JDG, Jenkins Grez, he mentioned, is if you do it too quickly, people get freaked out.
Yes.
Because they're like, this is my money. I want you to show me that you're thinking about it at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're fundamentally hitting the nail on the head on, transparently, the name of the company, which is for us, it's Clair. And Clair means in French, clarity. So I think speed requires you to have an experience that is very clear to your users about what they're doing. That's extremely hard, especially around one thing, which is fees. So is there going to be any fees? Yes. If so, how? Because if you're going too fast and you're not very clear about what's going to happen, then that's when consumers get freaked out. But if you're very clear to someone, right? Happiness is a combination of expectation versus reality. So if you're setting up the right expectation, hey, you're going to have 2 options. You're either going to get, your money, and we're going to default all of the advances that way, but you're going to get your money on the regular payment rails, which is ACH, and you can get them next day, or if it goes faster, maybe even that day. Or once you've taken that advance, you can upgrade to something that's more instant, and you upfront clear with them, you repeat that to them. Usually speed is not the problem because you've been upfront about what the experience looks like. I think fintechs struggle if they haven't done that right.
So you mentioned some areas where you think fintech has a lot of promise with AI. Where is it overhyped?
I'm very bullish on AI. I just think that the natural process for AI to be successful is to have capital, time, and space to try things. So obviously, 0.1% of the companies are going to be generational in help, like maybe 5-10% of them are going to have a significant impact in their niches. It's very hard to know which ones are going to really work. I'll give you a good example. There's a few tools that we have tried to use, especially actually including in underwriting, where it was completely overhyped what it could do because the logic behind was, nothing better than a machine learning model that we could build ourselves. And so there's some overhype there, but that also doesn't mean that I'm gonna, say everything in that category is not gonna work. It's just that trial that this company tried to do just didn't work. We're gonna need to wait for these things to come out. If I knew with a crystal ball what was gonna happen, I would become my own investor because you can make a lot of money knowing that. But I think the solution right now is you have to let it play out. You have to invest into a lot of things, and that's what we do at Clair.
Let's talk about partnerships at Clair, because I think this is key, not just for you, but a big chunk of the fintech industry is built on partnerships. Sometimes amongst fintechs, oftentimes partnerships with much larger established companies, right? Maybe share a bit how important partnerships are for you, and then let's talk about some of the advantages and risks.
So we exclusively distribute our product by catering to large payroll and workforce management companies. We call those customers for us, our partners. And the reason why is because over time, we've realized that deep product market fit for our product is going to be dependent on our ability to deeply understand the segment, the development process of our partners in order to build the right experience. I'll give you a very concrete example. Some of our partners have dedicated consumer fintech teams. Some don't, but would like to. So what does that mean? That means that we're going to take on a lot more architecture on our side and a lot more product design if they don't have a fintech team. But if they do have a fintech team, then it's going to be a little bit more, we're going to white glove, break down our infrastructure, allow them to do more complex things. And that requires to dedicate your entire company to build an organization that allows you to do that. And that's by design. We decided that we wanted to be the best in the world at that, and therefore we removed the noise of going direct to consumers or selling to large businesses. Some of the hardest conversation I had, we were working with massive organizations, large businesses that were early on at Clair, and then had to call them up and say look, we're gonna focus our time elsewhere. I think learning how to say no, especially as an earlier stage CEO, is as important as knowing what you're saying yes to.
Do you worry about platform risk?
No, because historically, platforms have really struggled to build this themselves. There's a lot of minutiae complexity to get something like this off the ground the right way. But I think you can't stay asleep at the wheel. So you're going to always have to be better at underwriting, better at distribution, better at user experience. And you also have to treat your partners as thought partners. I want to be calling the leaders of each of our partners and sitting down with them, take a plane cross country, sit down even for an hour and say, what's top of mind? How can we help you? And feel like we're just an extension of their own team. And if we do that well, then I think we have a long road ahead of us.
How does your underwriting work? Because that's also a big part of what you do.
Our underwriting is to this now extremely complex because it's very efficient. So there's a lot of, if you talk about AI or ML, a lot of it is, with our ML team that works on it. But the underwriting is at its essence quite simple from a principles perspective. We advance earned wages. So if an employee has worked a few hours and we know that they did, then we're gonna make a portion of those wages available. And then for repayment, depending on the advancement of those payroll and workforce management system, we can use payroll flows, we can use cash flow underwriting tools. But that's how our underwriting methodology works. Now there's so many details in that. Let's take one-person businesses that only have one employee and they're not really good at running payroll on time, so that becomes more risky. So what are you going to do with those populations? Then there's populations where the employees earn most of their money not on wages but on tips. How do you make tips available? And then there's businesses that, for whatever reason, still to this day like to write checks. Okay, so if your repayment methodology is dependent on them running payroll electronically and now suddenly they decide to write a check, how are you going to do this? So if you think about it, you can do Clair V1 with a lot of investment, but you can kind of get it up and running to make Clair, the quality it is today, it's years and years of training models, understanding all the minutia, all the little edge cases, and that is what builds the equity value for investors.
Nico, I'm sure you know this extremely well. The reason why a lot of investors don't back credit startups is because this tension that as a startup, you need to grow as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But as a credit company, you will blow up if you do that. Managing that is the hardest part, or one of the hardest things in your business.
Yeah.
How do you manage this tension?
We spend a lot of time on this, and one of the first things I say is that there's a reason why also we only underwrite on earned wages, is because you are only advancing money to people if you know they've worked and you know they're gonna get paid. And then what you're doing is you're just removing edge cases where you thought that was the case, but it wasn't. So you're talking about, like, compared to any credit product, like one of the safest credit products out there.
You also reduce for fraud that way.
Yeah, like the fraud is almost inexistent. Like our KYC pass rate is probably much better than anyone in the consumer market. We can make it much more eligible to any consumers to take advances. So I would say, like, if you ask, for example, our investors, like, they see us as a lot more as a money movement platform than really a platform that's taking credit risk. Right now, if you look at the statistics, right, like American consumers are like really down on their savings. They're taking more and more debt. Some of the banks are retracting from lending. That does not affect us as long as the employee's working their hours and we're knowing that an employer is actually not going to write a check, they're actually going to run payroll. So if you see where I'm going with this, it's like, It's not your typical, if you go too fast, you're going to lose a lot of money. It's just, if you don't learn fast enough around what data sets are important, your model's going to be a little bit more inefficient. So that's the dynamic we're trying to solve for.
So that means you also have to underwrite the employer, right? I mean, in many cases, if you're working with Coca-Cola,
Sure.
That's different type of credit, but what's the threshold of the type of companies you're working with?
Yeah, this is like, as you can imagine, years and years of work of like who we do it with. We also work. You'd be surprised how much once our payroll partners work with us, they also get excited about sitting down and having these conversations with us because we incentivize them for the model to be super efficient. So that way we can make it cheaper for consumers. We can make more wages available so they get more conversion. And also, like, they get a better rev share or like commissions, for doing that. And so there is like so much you can see in tiny little buckets of employers. And then, I mean, at that point, that gets into our IP and everything that we've built over the years. So it's hard for me to like really share how we're doing it, but that's the value of the company. And that's when, for example, very large payroll companies, when they think about who to partner with, that's when we become very interesting because they're like, whoa, okay, you guys have been doing this for 5 years in this like exclusive underwriting just based on payroll. Okay, I'd much rather bet on that than somebody who's been, spending a lot of time selling to employers or selling to employees, but they've never done this deep payroll connection, And so we win a lot of partnerships because of that.
Are they also focusing on your approval rate?
Yes.
That's key, has to be important.
It's our conversion rate, right? Like we have some of the best conversion rates, if not the best conversion rate in the market. People don't need to sign up for a separate app. The 70 seconds I was talking about, over 98% of people who are interested in taking in advance, like just are eligible if they want to, but that's a super high number. If you think about the typical EWA product, what they end up doing is they go employer by employer, right? And they sell that. So if you're a payroll company, you're like, okay, there's like 10% of my employers are using this. But with Clair, they can just turn it on for everyone. And so suddenly the reach is better, the simplicity is better. They don't need to send anybody to another app, so they can make their app more predominant. There's a lot of selling points for working with us.
Nico, can you recall your toughest day at Clair?
I mean, look, like, I'm not gonna lie, it's not an easy process. I think I have a lot of respect for anybody who goes onto this path of trying to build something, especially in a long-term partnership distribution strategy in fintech where you need an enormous amount of resources in order to just get an MVP off the ground. But I think the toughest days have always been when people that I admire, people that I really, really like, and people that I've really liked working with moved on to something else. This is personally for me always the hardest. It's normal, of course, for people like, to go from one company to the other. So that's not, fundamentally what I think, we should be fighting against. It's just, I really like the journey of building with a group of people. I think it's so fun. Departments that didn't exist like even months ago are now like running on their own, and you can see people grow. You can also, you have the human journey behind it. And so when people leave, especially when it's correlated to maybe a bet that you made that didn't pan out, you take it personally.
One thing I wanted to ask you, so I have a few Swiss friends other than you. So the kind of the ethos of the Swiss individual is put your head down and work and don't brag too much. Yeah. But as a startup founder, sales is everything. You kind of have to be bragging, obviously hopefully in a tasteful way, but that's part of your job, to recruit, to fundraise, to sell. You know, how do 100%. You manage those tensions?
I honestly, it's so funny, right? Like I struggled with this at the beginning, and I was less comfortable, I think, even just talking to people about what I, even what I was working on, because I felt like, do they even care? Like, do they, is this even worth their time? But what I realized is that passion is contagious, and I realized how passionate I was about this, and how I was allergic to inefficiency, and about the fact that every time that we shipped a product or we listened to customer surveys, like we just did it as a team, I think a week or two in our all hands, and you just see the quotes of why people use our product. That's what gives me the energy to be like, okay, I'm gonna get on a plane, I'm gonna go talk to this person, because it makes no sense for them not to have this thing embedded. And so I really come at it from a place of, I love the product we're building. I think there's so much more we need to build. I really feel like we're in the early days. I want to be doing this for as long as I can. And then I think once I frame it that way, then that becomes genuine to me. And I think that also becomes genuine to the people we're talking to. And that leads to people being interested in working with us.
Final question. I don't know how big of a reader you are, but are there books that maybe you've enjoyed recently, or books that you recommend often?
By far, if anybody's interested in the startup journey, I would really recommend reading The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I think I have spent less than 0.1% thinking about the fact that it's so cool that I have a company and that I'm able to build the thing that I want and we get funding. That's really 0.1%. It happens, but it's very, very rare. 99.9% of the time, I'm dealing with problems or issues or questions that no one else was able to solve, whether it's the team, whether it's customers, whether it's disagreements between two people in the company. And you need to be comfortable in discomfort. You need to be organized in a disorganized environment. You need to be a believer when there's no reason to believe. You need to be able to build something and then destruct it yourself because it was not the right thing. You need to tell people that they're better than they think they are, and then you need to tell people that they're worse than they think they are, depending on the situation. You need to do that and also make sure that you have enough energy to go home and, in my case, be a good husband.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
Of course, I did. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Nico from Clair. If you want more interviews, make sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your shows. It helps and means a lot. And if you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, just drop me a line on LinkedIn. Signing off till next week, I'm your host, Miguel Armaza.